Are we going to do legislative week in review? Or
Yes.
are we still?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, cool.
Okay. So I thought it was really interesting, trying to keep with the topic of policing, right? That these three pieces of legislation came out after the killing of George Floyd. So I thought that would be apropos for us to talk about this time, especially when we were talking about the triumphs that have come out of this whole tragedy, right? And of the protests. But all right, so the first one is this one, the HR 7100. And this is actually called the George Floyd Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act. There's a bill in the Senate, and there's also one in the House that was just introduced, right? And essentially, what it would do is that it would institute several reforms to police departments nationwide, including mandating all local, state, and federal law enforcement bodies report data to the Justice Department on uses of deadly force involving police, giving federal grants to law enforcement agencies, which devise new programs for oversight or hiring, such as bringing on more diverse officers.
Give them more money. Sorry.
Right. I mean, ultimately, it's like, you can have as much diversity as you want, but if there's still this systemic bias that you have, well, then.
Yeah, I was wondering whether or not diversity like affects the blue wall effect or not.
It doesn't, because look at the four officers that were arrested or that were charged for George Floyd's murder. It was a white guy, a black guy, an Asian guy, and a Hispanic guy. I mean, how do you get any more diverse than that? You know?
Yeah.
All right, so creating a federal task force to coordinate the investigation and prosecution of law enforcement agencies, and creating a set of federal minimum standards for police departments, standards which do not currently exist. So again, it's pretty vague, but we'll see. So like I said, there is a Senate version that was previously introduced in December 2019, and it was introduced by a Democrat Cardin, and then the House version was introduced on June 4th by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee.
Do you know? Do you know the one thing? First thing that jumps out at me when I read this is, I love the idea of that required reporting to the Justice Department. Do we know of any information where that information should just be publicly available, like on a website, or not depending on our media to get
like that? Like our FISA courts.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be FOIA requests.
Yeah, ideally, I could just look up information, see, what does my local police force, how many times have they had to use force, how many times have they done this, how many times have they done that, and how does that work compared to towns across the nation of my size,
That would have to be public information, I would guess, right?
Right. Yeah, so it'd just be a matter of how you acquire that, whether or not they're going to make it
right.
Easily available, right, how easy it is, yeah.
I just don't like the wording, like, encouraging instead of requiring.
Yeah.
Because it's just it just seems like it's a reaction to kind of like, we'll throw some crumbs to satisfy the peasants, and it's not really going to change things.
Can you scroll up, Daisy? The reporting was required, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's required.
Yeah.
But I mean, the name of the act itself, the name of the bill is encouraging.
Oh, okay. Well, the mandated reporting is a good thing, as long as there's some teeth to how they're compelled to report, they can't get away with lying.
Right. So, the supporters of this bill, they say obviously that it brings about much needed reform, but the opposition on the left, they say that it doesn't go far enough, because obviously for them it's like they want to defund or disband the police. And this is not doing that. This is just essentially holding them accountable. And on the right, they're saying that they're afraid that the police isn't going to be able to do their job because of keeping law and order because of the publicity, right?
They don't do their job. They don't keep law and order right now. So like, I don't understand that argument.
You know that on the right that they blindly follow
Right.
the cops, the law and order. I guess that's why it was such a big deal when you had all of these police officers coming out and saying that they weren't going to enforce a lot of these like lockdown measures and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And that blindly follow the police is probably a mix of ideological and, wanting the police union support,
supposedly
right?
there is this whole theory that on the right you have, or on the conservative side, you have more of this like that they are more willing to follow orders, or just like they're more religious, right? So they're more used to having these sort of frameworks that you have to work within. So I think supposedly that does have something to do with it. So this has, so far it has 86 co-sponsors, the House bill, or the House resolution, and like I said, it was only introduced this week. So the only problem is, as you can see here, it's 86 Democrats. There's no bipartisan support on this. So what does that mean? Most likely, it's not going to go anywhere. All right.
It'll have to wait until November or January.
Well, yeah, and even then, who knows?
Even then, who knows?
All right. So then we have the Eric Garner Excessive Force Prevention Act. Right, and this version was presented by Kirsten Gillibrand in the Senate. This act would make chokeholds or other oxygen-hindering maneuvers illegal under federal civil rights law. It was originally presented or introduced in September of 2019 by Hakeem Jeffries in the House. So again, this is one that
So it could have potentially prevented Eric Garner's death.
Yes. Yeah. So, horrific. And again, these are all things that they have been introduced since late last year, but now they're getting, support from the different branches of government, because a lot of these were either presented in the House or they were presented in the Senate, and now they have a partner bill in their respective chambers. So, I mean, obviously you can't pass a bill if it's not something that's presented in both the House and the Senate.
Right.
So that's why, I mean, these things are gaining some legs, but unfortunately the majority of this is being introduced by Democrats. And so again, we're not really doing anything, right? So the supporters say that the chokeholds, they should not be used, while officials, like police officials, they counter, saying that sometimes that use of non-lethal force is necessary. So far, there's only 4 Democratic co-sponsors of the Senate version, and 2 of which are Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. And then the House bill now has 122 co-sponsors, which I think like 97 of them happened within this last week, which that's pretty amazing, because like I said, this originally was introduced back in September 2019, and it really didn't have any support, and then now all of a sudden it's getting more support.
I wonder if Klobuchar started. I said Eric Garner before. I mean, since George Floyd wouldn't have died if this had been in place. I wonder if she joined. Yeah, she joined recently with the hubbub about George Floyd, which she is kind of attached to.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, she's got no real skin in the game, but at the same time, she was invited to the funeral, right? She got to have her little photo op.
Oh. Okay. Well, this is a positive. This has some push. It's horrific if Republicans prevent it from getting passed.
Yeah. Okay, and then
and there also would be the worry about, okay, if they can't use a chokehold, what do police do? Maybe they rely more on pepper spray and stuff like that, but at least that's non-lethal. It's not going to have accidental
I mean,
deaths.
the whole thing is that they're supposed to be de-escalating the situation. And it's, I
Right.
mean, if you have someone like Biden who instead of shooting them in the heart, you would shoot them in the leg,
Right.
you
Well,
know,
I know.
that makes a lot more sense. That's obviously that's de-escalating, right?
Now, all my friends would call me a Trumpy for saying this, but if Trump had said that, you would hear it every single day, 1,000 times a day.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just the bias of the media is horrific. And they're allowing us to have a presidential candidate that has no business being there, that has a horrific record. Okay, you guys know I'm preaching to the choir.
Again, if
All
you
right.
look at the Camden model, I mean, their whole thing is based on de-escalating the situation.
Yeah.
And it seems like, and it was like, that's the kind of stuff that should be implemented on a national basis and it should be required. So it seems to me like banning this or that, hold or whatever because it can kill a suspect. To me, that's just cutting around the edges. It's not really dealing with the main issue, which is de-escalating the situation. Why should anyone be tackled for trying to pass a counterfeit $20 bill? It just doesn't make any sense.
Right. Right.
I'm going to put probably a bad source, but if you have a better article, Steve, I'm going to put something in there from Politico on Camden, New Jersey police
Yeah,
force.
there was something from Bloomberg I saw that was pretty good.
Okay.
And I can put the
This
link
is
in the
city that really did abolish the police and rebuilt the department from the ground up. So it's got to give people at least it looks like it's probably a pretty decent article on it.
I mean, not to say that everything worked perfectly there, but at least they're one of the rare examples where they actually did this kind of radical reform, and it was generally seen as a very positive thing. I mean, there's no talk of going back to what they had before in Canada.
Well, folks, yeah, and we definitely, absolutely, we would need to learn from that across the country as they're reforming police departments.
Yeah, and ultimately, you can't blanket. That's the problem with these statements of like defund the police or disband the police or abolish ICE. I mean, abolish ICE is something different because we really don't need ICE. We already have other programs set in place to take care of those issues. But
well, there are border police, right?
huh?
There are border police for the border, and there are regular police for other criminal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. For immigration,
Right.
we already have other policing forms essentially.
I mean, this is all a result of 9/11, right? You had Homeland Security. The part of Homeland Security is when you start having to take off your shoes and your belt when you get onto an airplane, and they start, all this stuff, and the policing, the militarized policing, all this stuff started with 9/11. It's no accident that this was, all this stuff and all the legislation was ready right after 9/11, right, to be implemented. So it's part of a trend.
But you see, it goes to show you that again, like even with the policing thing, that you can't have this blanketed sort of way of dealing with everything, where every single department is going to be mandated the same way. I think that it has to be individualized to cater to the specific communities, because your town in Hopkinton, or I don't know if it's a city or a town or what, isn't the same as Salem, isn't the same as Boston, isn't the same as Quincy. We all have different needs. And again, that's why it comes down to it should be what the citizens want to be policed on.
So I can use chokeholds in some place in Florida if we think that's appropriate or not. I mean, obviously certain things should be banned outright, right? Like certain.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, where do you draw the line then? Because then you also have some people say that you shouldn't be using tasers, but then that's considered the non-lethal way of containing someone.
Right. Well, you draw the line where where people are actually killed, and people are killed with tasers as well. So I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, tasers do have.
That's what I'm saying, is that
Yeah.
where do you draw the line? That's
Right.
why I feel that once you involve the community, what happens is that the conversation, you start to hold different people accountable. Right now, it's this ominous figure that you have to hold accountable, right? It's this otherism. Whereas when you involve the community and they're the ones who are being held accountable for whatever goes on in their community, then it's just different. It's a different sort of situation. Again, I definitely think that it has more to do with like what it is that they're policing rather than the methods. I've said it time and time again. I'm a radical pacifist. I don't think that it should get to that point at all. But I'm not a police officer who has been put in these situations. And when obviously they're supposed to be trained to be able to deal with being in like really volatile, tense situations, because your brain does work differently when you're under certain circumstances. So I understand that, but that's why for me, I don't feel that I am qualified to be able to give enough input, because I don't know what that feels like. You know, I don't live in a really crime-ridden area, where it's like, you know, you have a murder. Like my niece lives in Lynn, and you know, she crosses over a few streets in Lynn, she's not in a very good part of the neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? But where she lives, she's pretty okay. And I don't think that they should have the same mandates in both of those areas, because again, they're two different things. But anyway, so this has gone on really long. All right, so the last thing is the Restoration of Civil Rights Act, which would implement several reforms to lawsuits or prosecutions involving American policing and law enforcement, including eliminating the qualified immunity defense for law enforcement, which I know, Steve, that you were saying that you weren't totally for eliminating it.
Well, I was just saying an argument could be made for it. I'm not saying that I necessarily support it.
Yeah, okay. So then explicitly granting the right to sue a state or state official for a federal constitutional violation. And if a local U.S. attorney working on behalf of the Justice Department in a certain jurisdiction refuses to prosecute a case, the bill allows another Justice Department attorney from another jurisdiction to potentially prosecute it instead. So this reminded me a lot of what Justin Amash put out with Ilhan Omar. And so, you know, obviously you have the supporters saying that obviously this brings about, you know, reforms, the type of reforms that we need. But then you also have the other side who just says that because this, as you can see, there's no text, there's nothing yet. It was just introduced. And there's no partner bill in the Senate. So they're just looking to get more information on this in order to be able to, you know, see if this is actually something that's viable. But again, the fact that we have yet another bill that is speaking upon the same things of addressing qualified immunity, and I think it just ultimately comes down to accountability. People want some sort of accountability. That is the main thing. I think that's why with these protests, people they stopped with the rioting once they started seeing that that things were actually starting to happen. You know, that these police officers were actually charged with things, that the charges were elevated. That's speaking the language of change that people want to hear, because for too long we've just heard the platitudes. And I'm not saying people are totally awake yet, but they're getting there.
It remains to be, charges are one thing, it remains to be seen whether they'll actually be convicted of those charges.
Well, you also have to remember that if they go with, you know, because obviously people want first-degree murder charges on this, right? But
Second degree,
there's two parts to that. So then it's the fact that, first of all, when it'll be harder for them to win the case, for the prosecutor to win the case with first-degree murder charges.
Second degree, right?
And secondly, you also have to look at, when this goes to trial, is this even going to be a fair trial? How is this going to be fair? There is no way that you have people that have been isolated from everything that's going on and don't have some sort of bias that they're going to implicate in their decision.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it started, they first charged manslaughter, but they elevated it to second degree, right? That's
Well,
where
it's
it
third degree and manslaughter, and now it's now they're charged with second degree, third degree, and manslaughter. So they didn't drop the third degree charge, I
Oh,
believe.
okay. Okay.
So I guess
Yeah.
you can be convicted of both.
Right.
I'm not sure how it
Second
works.
degree is basically some awareness of what you're doing could lead to death or something, right?
Well,
Yeah.
first degree would be where it was premeditated,
Where
where
you
you planned it, right? And this was
right.
not obviously didn't like set out to murder
I
this
think
guy.
second degree is going to be something like you have reasonable expectation that your actions could lead to death or something like that, right? It's like basically you're
Something like
aware
that,
what you're
yeah.
doing, right? Yeah.
Right. All right, guys. So
All right. All
you
right.
think we're good?
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody. See you next
All
week.
right. Thanks for
All right.
watching.
All right. Bye-bye.
Peace.
Peace.
Bye-bye. Peace.